Okay, afternoon everybody. You can hear? Yes? Yeah, okay. Let me know if you can't, because I haven't got a very loud voice. I used to have a chief exec I worked for who would sometimes put a little sign up saying speak up, and because he was 4'6" or whatever, it'd be behind everybody else, which is a bit off-putting. So, as Jean said, I'm chief exec at Oldham Council and have been so for about 5.5 years. And I am now also the accountable officer for Oldham CCG, so that means I've got both a local authority and an NHS contract. So, and a combined budget of about 1.2 billion, actually, although that's commissioning, not direct provision, so a lot of that goes to schools and hospitals. And I've been doing that for about 14 months. And then, for those of you that don't know, sorry, that's me. Greater Manchester is 10 local authority areas, and we are a devolution area, although this phase of government is probably less committed to devolution than previous phases, more concerned with other issues. I've actually worked for half of the Greater Manchester authorities, so what's really interesting is listening to the debate, the lightning talks there, that conversation about what do we do ourselves and what do we do collectively. So there's a continuous debate in Greater Manchester about, do you do it at the level of Greater Manchester, do you do it clusters, do you do it individuals? And we do some things really well. So I'm the lead, because I've got the lead chief exec role for Safe and Strong Communities, that means I have the lead role for civil resilience. So Dr. Cathy Oldham, who leads the civil resilience team, basically we do emergency response coordinated, and then we have local arrangements. So this week I'm gold for Greater Manchester. So if anything happens in Greater Manchester, I'm the gold chief exec contact. So when the arena attack happened, we moved in really quickly in terms of those quite well-established relationships. But there are tensions in that always, you know, because we think we do it better in Oldham than other places, obviously. And, you know, sunk costs, we've already bought this, we'd have to share yours, or, yeah, all of those kind of tensions that we're very live to. And then health and social care devolution, which we're on with now, is a partnership of 38. So that's hospital providers, clinical groups, other foundation trusts, GPs, of which there are many. So working in that kind of complexity, again, is really interesting. I used to be the clerk for the Waste Disposal Authority. Oldham used to have the Waste Disposal lead, so I'm not going to talk to you about waste disposal. You'd be thrilled to know, but I know more about that. Doing waste disposal for 9 of the 10 boroughs. Interesting learning. So, this is the strategy. So overall, the kind of great place that we want Greater Manchester to be. We have a mayor, we have Andy Burnham as the mayor of Greater Manchester, directly elected mayor, which is really interesting because that mayoral model is kind of put on top of the existing model. Some things are Andy Burnham's responsibility directly, some things it's him and the 10 local authority leaders, and some things aren't him at all, they're the 10 local authority leaders. So that complexity of governance as well is really interesting. And you know, you can't really disagree with any of these things, but in a way as well, I think I've heard every strategy, every commission, everything we do has workforce implications in it. Nobody holds a collective accumulation of those workforce commitments, and so everybody's got competing kind of priorities or issues in a context where I think we all recognise we have real issues in difficult gaps. So, for example, in Greater Manchester, we quite often pinch social workers off each other, you know, so you have a bit of a Cold War race to salaries, particularly if somebody's been judged as inadequate and they need to bring different staff in, and that destabilises. So that kind of thing is happening increasingly in health and social care, and losing European workforce won't help with that. So that's the ambition, and you know, a lot of noise about Greater Manchester, and underpinning it we have a model of public service reform which sets out a whole range of things that we want to do, not least that we work on a common geographic footprint within our districts around a population of 30 to 50,000. So that's not just local government, not just health, that's all of public services. So how do we work through a model that so the workforce kind of feature where we have not lots and lots of different assessments of individuals. They have to keep telling their story lots of times. We're looking to say, how do we design our services around people's lived experience and lived reality, which is a big challenge when we struggle to do that across 10 local authorities in terms of joining up. Actually, in a place and a locality, how do we do that connectivity? So The Guardian, it's a few years ago now, was saying, you know, all the devolution, things that were happening in Greater Manchester, officially the most exciting place in the UK. Yay! So it certainly felt like the busiest place at lots of times. So that's fantastic, isn't it? And lots of plans and strategies. You know, everybody's really good, I think, at putting those quite compelling visions and views of what the future will look like. The gap then between rhetoric, reality and relevance can be quite significant. So at the same time that The Guardian was running that most exciting place to be in the UK, this was the picture that they ran alongside that story. Well, you know, given that these are not all of those are now leaders or even the mayor, actually. In fact, I think interestingly, George Osborne's no longer with us in that role, and there's only Richard Leese, the leader of Manchester City Council, so they've moved on. But that just shows you, really, that traditional view of local government, white men in a darkened Victorian room, sat round a table. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, for learning and development is how do we tackle this? The inertia in the system that, despite what we say, pulls us all the time into looking like we've always done. And, you know, people say, well, we've always done it like that around here, or you'll only be here 5 minutes, I'll keep my head down, you'll be gone, there'll be a new idea along in 10 minutes, so why should I connect to this one? And particularly then when you look at this picture, so this is painting from 1604, Somerset House, and apart from the roughs, really, there isn't an awful lot of difference in terms of the most exciting place to be and 1604. So reminding ourselves, actually, when we are doing this different thing, how different is it really? Do we need to hype it up as different? I actually really dislike change as a label or transformation as a label. I think it privileges those things over the everyday, and actually doing the everyday really well is desperately, desperately important. So we talk in Oldham about design, and not co-design or co-production, but about the democratisation of design, where democracy is about different voices and perspectives. Because to do this, to deliver this ambition and deliver it well, we cannot do it by just talking to ourselves or people like us. We have to bring different perspectives and different voices, and we cannot talk about difficult to engage or difficult to reach. Everybody can be connected with if we choose to make the effort. So that's my I'm not really going to talk about digital, although I do think digital is an amazing tool to support some of these things. The risk, as ever with things, is that they become an end in themselves, and we do digital really well. So what? What has digital delivered for you? What purpose did you want to achieve through using digital? It's like health and social care integration is not an end in itself. It's at the end of the day, we sit back and go, we've integrated that really well. And then you say, has anything happened to people as a result? And the answer is not really. Then we wasted our time, my view. So in Oldham, we have the Oldham model, which is basically our kind of strategic framework for the place, not just for the council, for the place. So this has been co-designed, engaging lots of stakeholders. And we want thriving communities. We don't just want resilient communities. Resilience kind of implies get your flak jacket on, keep your head down, you'll survive. We want to thrive. We want an inclusive economy, one that works for everybody, and we want cooperative services. And by that we mean either delivered by other people or in partnership, that we use our assets differently. And to achieve this, if we're to achieve this genuinely, we need people to think and work very differently. So in an inclusive economy, we've done mapping across the hospital, the council, the leisure provider, the college, the housing provider. GMP are contributing through the Oldham division as well. Who do we employ and where do they live? So I know the workforce of the local authority, how many people live in Oldham? 72%, that's good. 92% in Greater Manchester. I know on what salary and what ward they live in. And in one of our most deprived wards, Coldhurst, it was in the paper yesterday, 60% of children live in poverty in Coldhurst ward. It's not the most deprived ward in Oldham. Werneth currently is, where 62% of children live in poverty. I only employ 57 people. So as a local authority, if I employed more people from that ward, I would be changing the economic output. The average household income in the Coldhurst ward is £15,000. Well, if I recruited differently, if GMP recruited differently, if the hospital did, and so on, we could have a direct impact in terms of the economic well-being of the borough. So why don't we? And why is my HR team or people services team saying your workforce isn't representative of your location? These are some of the things that we could think we could do to it. So I'm going to talk a bit about influence later on, because that was one of the things Jean asked me to touch on. But do you wait in your roles to be told what the vision is, or do you use the problem-solving skills that police are fantastic at, and you say, actually, here's the issue, look at what we think, boss, in terms of some of the solutions that there could be, because nobody likes people that just bring them problems. Well, I don't anyway. I like it if they bring a problem and some potential solutions. So where are you in that dynamic of we see the change we want to be, and we have a role and we can actively influence the direction of it. And so Thriving Communities, we're doing a huge amount about every single asset in Oldham, whether that's workforce, every member of staff can have 3 days corporate volunteering, so go out and do things. So you might be a guide leader and you need to go on a training course where you can take time out for doing that. That's quite different in local government. We've got fruit routes across the borough, community orchards, we've got growing hubs in all our parks. We do all sorts of things with food. Our catering service is organic award winner, beats Sainsbury's for it, because you know what, we are deprived, but that actually means that our population deserve better from us than other areas. So thinking creativity all the time, and how do our learning and development approaches drive that. So for example, we've just developed a core induction. So if you work in Oldham, it doesn't matter what organisation you work in, the Oldham induction is something you all go through, because it's about Oldham, the place. And the real danger is that you understand your institution or your organisation and you forget it's grounded in the place, and you don't understand that. So we do quizzes about, did you know Oldham used to have more millionaires than anywhere else in the country? There used to be 360 mills in Oldham. Every mill owner gave a diamond for the mayoress's chain, first IVF baby, first computer, all sorts of things. William Churchill used to be the MP for Oldham. I'll stop going on about Oldham. But so for me, in terms of this, the majority of, and this is the room, that is reflecting this in a way, most learning development and leadership development as well takes place in our institutions or our professions. So we come together as police officers. I was at the NHS Leadership Academy yesterday talking to senior people in NHS. I'm in Warwick tomorrow talking to aspiring senior leaders in local government. So that's 3 days, similar conversations, but professions. Or we do it in Oldham Council, or we do it at Oldham Hospital. And then we do a little bit about collaboration and system leadership. But we spent all the time reminding, here we are at the police training quarters, here we are at the NHS Leadership Academy. The mindset, the framing of that is not collaborative. It's not about system views, even really. And the language is, the symbols, if you go to the NHS Leadership Academy, it says NHS on the cups that you use. Your ID badge has got police on it here. So the non-verbal communication is always reinforcing your institutional profession. Now, I'm not saying that's not important. It is really important. I think, I want to be a place in Oldham where policing thrives, where social workers thrive, where it's a good place to be a nurse. I value that. But in the context of Oldham, I want you to be an Oldham nurse, an Oldham police officer. I want you to work for the place, not just your profession or your institution. And so we don't give enough consideration as decision makers or people designing NLD about the context that we're working with. People are not widgets. You don't stick a victim label or a looked after child label or a patient label and they're suddenly divorced from their life experience or the places that they live in. But we do that all the time, actually. And we think we know everything about somebody because of that label. Really pecks my head when I go into a hospital. It says every patient matters, as though I didn't matter when I was outside the door, not a patient, but I do now matter that I am a patient. And you do wonder, is that because now they'll get a payment for me? I matter now that I'm a financial value. It didn't matter when I was outside. So what we're doing across Greater Manchester, so I should say as well, I'm the lead for workforce and leadership development for Greater Manchester as well. I have that responsibility, and we've just developed a Leaders in GM programme that's based on, I love Margaret Heffernan's stuff actually, but based on some of these ideas that actually social connectedness for all of us in public service and voluntary and community faith sector is as important as it is for our communities. We're very good at telling other people they should do things, and we don't very often hold the mirror on ourselves and say, you know what, actually, most things get done through relationships and trust, so we should invest as much in building those relationships and understanding each other for ourselves in our own organisations, but across our organisational landscapes as well. And collaboration, this alchemy, this magic that happens. But also, and I don't think we are very good at this last one at all in the public service, conflict, debate, discussion is a real positive. If you leave a room seeing the world slightly differently than you did before you went in the room, having a different view, changing your position, I think there's been a value to the debate. If you had all the answers before you got in the room, you've got the same answers when you left, what did you do in the room? What was the point of it? And so I've always had a coach. I quite often have a coach that I don't particularly like, actually. I'm not my current coach, and anybody knows my current coach. I really like my current coach. But somebody that I will disagree with and think, no, I don't see the world like that. And that you respond to things both with your head and your gut. And so if your gut say, no, I don't like that, why? And actually, if you don't agree with anything I'm saying to you this afternoon, why? What is it about the way you see the world that is so different from the way I see the world? Those points of dissonance are the greatest learning opportunities, I think. You can get into too much of a confirmatory learning stance where you just think, everybody agrees with me. I'm the chief exec. Fantastic. Must mean I'm right. Actually, all it means is nobody said they didn't agree with me. And that's a really dangerous place for us all to be in. And that's recognising hierarchy in organisations, and ways of doing it. But actually, it's so important that you create that sort of space for that discussion. Otherwise, mistakes were made, but not by me, becomes the kind of narrative. And so the kind of leadership we want to see in a place, in an organisation or a profession, the kind of workforce we want to see, how is our approach to learning and development mirroring, driving, responding to that? I don't think there's enough conversation about that interconnection. So really using digital, great. Why? Why are you using digital? Are you using digital because it's the latest thing to do? Are you using it because everybody else is using it? Or are you using it because it's a fantastic tool that helps the learning of some people, but it doesn't work for everybody because nothing works for everybody? So why, always? What's the purpose? What's the point? What's the outcome? And are we really all clear, and do we all understand that's the same outcome? So Leaders in Greater Manchester, built on a platform of, we want to be a community of leaders. So building the relationships is as important. So actually, digital experience probably isn't going to build those relationships, maybe. That's not to say it couldn't, because crowdsourcing, different kind of platforms, there are, weak ties and strong ties. What type of relationships do we want to build? But the community is really important. And here we do want resilience as well as capability, because there's something important about that. But can we lead within our organisations and on behalf of our organisations? So I represent Oldham Council as much outside as I do inside, or Oldham CCG outside, inside. But our systems and our places, because I spend as much time in the criminal justice system or the health and wellbeing system or the education and skills system as I do in the organisation. But place, whether that's Greater Manchester, Oldham, one of the neighbourhoods of Oldham, I've been raging since Farage made his, anyway, if you don't know about it, I won't tell you because I don't want to share that story, but a very negative view of Oldham. Oldham is a place it's easy to write a negative story about. And so how do we push back against that through our places, our systems, our organisations? But we have to do that simultaneously. So when they closed the courts in Oldham, I can see that from an efficiency point of view, from an organisational perspective, close the court, release the asset, get a capital receipt. The consequence for the criminal justice system in Oldham was significant because the police now need extra vehicles and extra people to take people to court. That hadn't been factored through in the MOJ's decision about the courts. And then the impact on people who go, well, I know Oldham, I'd feel comfortable being a witness there. I don't want to go to Tameside or Rochdale, I feel unsafe. But then the impact on the place in terms of those jobs have gone. That's now a derelict, an empty site. But actually, more importantly, solicitors are now moving as well because solicitors want to be next to courts. So the economic impact of that organisational decision is the greatest economic impact of any court closure in the country. So we don't make our decisions like that because our frameworks don't support it. But increasingly, what we're saying is we have to everything is interconnected. So we need a leadership team and a workforce team who are cognizant and aware of that in taking their things forward. And then something I think for the skills of all of us in this, it used to be easier, didn't it? We just ran our organisations or worked in our organisations, much more straightforward. So in this messier world, that is actually how the world always was, we just somehow pretended it wasn't, how is learning and development a strategic translator? And by that I mean, how does it do that between the mission of the senior leadership or national government or the mayor in some or deputy mayor in the Oldham Greater Manchester context? How do you translate through ambition, commitment? How do you understand it enough to be able to translate that through into the plans and the activity that you're going to do for your workforce development? Equally though, how do you translate back up to say, this is where we currently are? Jean, I did the Masters at Warwick with Jean quite a few years ago now, and I use a lot the essay that we had to write that said, does resistance to change exist, or is it managers' justification for their own failings? So when you start saying they're resisting change, they don't want to do this, is that true? Or have you just badly planned what you're doing, partly because you had a very false understanding of the starting context? So in my research area is in trust and control. I'm really interested in trust and distrust. If you trust me, you'll be hearing what I say to you very differently than if you distrust me. Or you're, holding off making a judgment. So something about context and understanding. And I just think if the L&D team in an organisation don't know the organisation and haven't really got their fingers on the pulse, then to be honest, God help us all, because there's an expectation that you do. How do you? How do you know that you do? What kind of feedback loops have you got in place that you can kind of trust? Drivers for diversity, and that's not just ethnicity or gender. This is much more about different perspectives. I mentioned before about Oldham and Coldhurst ward. We only employ 57 people. That's a Bangladeshi heritage ward, nearly 100%. So actually, if I employed more people from that ward, I would be doing some of the diversity issue. I'd also be dealing with some of the inequalities issue in terms of financial inequality. But the point about democratisation of design, if rooms are just full of people like us, what gets designed reflects that. So if you look on your iPhone or other phones are available, at the Maps thing, there's a little logo, isn't there? Walking, public transport and car. No wheelchair logo. So if you're in a wheelchair, what app do you click on to see how you get somewhere? And I suspect that's because there was nobody in the room in a wheelchair when they were designing that. In fact, somebody said to me once, most apps are designed by men in their 20s to replace their mum. I need a lift, mum, Uber. I need what's for tea, Deliveroo. So it's kind of, that kind of... might not be true. Sorry if anybody in this digital conference is involved in designing apps that I've now offended. But that driver for diversity, different perspectives. And then builders of communities, of interest, of knowledge, of practice. How do you build communities in different kinds of ways? And how do we choreograph that mix, that dance between organisation, system, place, profession, all the time thinking about how the symbols of the organisations, the courses that people are exposed to? Because I was just thinking, with that, the virtual reality stuff, is any of that place-based? Is any of that, I've been to Easingwold Emergency Planning College, how do we do that sort of thing where it's not just the police's response? Are there a rape, a stranger rape or whatever, has massive community impacts in terms of perceptions of safety. How do you design it differently? But if you just design it from a police perspective, it will just reinforce your current patterns. It will be like using your iPad as a typewriter. Because a lot of people, that's all we use with tech. We use it to do the things we already did quicker. So, and how do we tell stories? People remember stories far more than they remember facts. So what are the stories of policing in a modern society? What are the stories of your own organisation? What are the stories? And then we do a lot of work about what lens do I see things through. So do I see health through the lens of a hospital or institution? Or do I see health through the lens of people and place? Do I see safe communities through the lens of policing? Or do I see them through the lens of people? So how you frame things is really important, just to understand it from your own perspective, but recognising people frame things differently. So we use this a lot. So, whether that's a 6 or a 9, depends which side of the number you're stood on. That doesn't make anybody wrong. If you're saying it's 6 and the other person goes, no, it's 9, you're both right. But how much of our lives do we spend arguing, going, no, it's 6, no, it's 9? It's both. You've just got a different perspective. And how do you use learning and development to expose people and remind them of that all the time, that, you being right doesn't make the other person wrong. And actually, I think we've got just a national issue about that. Anybody sets an opinion, everybody then just rips into them. But actually, more than one thing can be true at the same time. So, and we use a lot of this, because people say to me, oh, you use local government language. And I think, do I? Well, I probably do a little bit, because I've spent a lot of time in local government. Is it just actually the way I see things is different? So local government has spent a long time talking about community leadership, place-based leadership. So this story, okay, you're more police connected. What does this say to you? Hooray? No? So what it says to me is, oh my God, where's his body? I need to write to the funeral directors in Oldham and make sure our crematorium doesn't deal with the funeral, because there is still one of his victims on the moors in Saddleworth, which is in Oldham, that's not been found. And there are still people living in Tameside, family living in Tameside. So I go, oh my God, what impact could this and might this have on Oldham as a place? And what action can I take as a local authority to deal with this? And in the end, what we did, Tameside and Oldham, we took legal action against the executor to have the body dealt with separately, because your body's not part of your estate, so it can be dealt with separately. So to make sure it didn't come over into Tameside or Saddleworth. And then a member of staff had to take personal responsibility for the body, take it out, crematorium, and then out to sea to leave it in an undisclosed location. And I think it's just when you look at these stories, so I have another one that I use. 2 young girls tragically were killed on New Year's Eve in Oldham a couple of years ago. And I say to people, what do you see? And if you work in the hospital, you say, oh God, how did the ambulance people deal with it? Were they dead on the scene? Did they die in the ambulance? How was the A&E responding to it? What were the consequences? I see it, were they in care? Did we ever know them? What were the ethnicity of the girls and the people that were driving the vehicle? Are there going to be any community tensions arising from it? So how we see things is really driven by our kind of own professions or experience. But what is the power then of bringing those perspectives together? The richness of that shared perspective and understanding is just amazing, and it's just such a resource that is there that is underutilised in achieving those outcomes. So safe communities is not just the responsibility of the police. The real danger is that rather than recognising that and saying let's have a blended team approach, you go, bloody hell, it'd all be perfect if only the local authority had pulled the finger out, or A&E would be perfect if those bloody GPs had worked longer hours. We other each other in the system all the time, rather than thinking about the power that can be brought from that. And so Jean said about influencing. This is old now in terms of Mark Moores and creating public value, but it has a staying power for me because it's really useful. So do we understand the outcomes that we're after? And do we have a shared view of that, or are we trying to achieve different things? What is our operational capacity? And actually that's not just your organisation, that can be other people. So the NHS does not create health at all. At best it deals with ill health. Health creation is a personal community responsibility. It's driven by the environment that we're in. All sorts of things impact the operational capacity to drive health. Same is true for safety. But what's the authorising environment? So if for any change you want to see, who do you need to influence? Who has to have a voice in this or a perspective? Sometimes to change things in Greater Manchester, I have to go outside Greater Manchester and be seen as credible and recognised as having a pertinent view outside to be heard back in. We couldn't shift the narrative on the economic narrative, which was city centres is where you do your investment, and eventually it trickles down to other areas. Oldham's uphill, nothing trickles down uphill. So I had to go and do some work externally with the RSA and other organisations to really push and be part of that inclusive growth, inclusive economy narrative to get the change locally. So mapping who's in that environment, and it might be you want to do a qualification or you wanted to go for a promotion. So part of the authorising environment is your personal environment, your personal networks. You might see less of your partner because you're going to do this. Are they on board with that before you move it through? So time to work that through, and who is important in any kind of change. is really important. So this is a photo of the day in Sweden that they changed the side of the road that they drive on. Didn't go very well. I assume they did more than just say 3rd of September's the day we're all changing, guys, off you go. But even with that, it didn't work. So the thing is, just telling people that they need to change or that you've got a good idea and they should really listen to you just isn't enough. So thinking about what it is you want to do and how it fits with other people's agenda or ways of thinking is really crucial. And I think for L&D, again, just to summarise really, deep understanding of current realities. Have you ever put yourself in other places? So there is a view of the role of art is to make the everyday strange so that you pay attention again. So if you think of Picasso, he takes the human form and he completely deconstructs it to make you think about what is the human form. So how do your learning experiences take people out their comfort zones and startle their thinking so that they see the world differently at the end of it? Because if it didn't really, you've just done that kind of sheep dip sort of training. You haven't got people that are more, just have a different perspective and a different reflection. How you're going to do things, why, I think, as I said, you can't ask why enough, I don't think, although people that work with me think I do ask why far too much, so different perspectives on that one. I think they're wrong in this case. I don't think that's a 6 or 9. I think I'm right. But the how and when. And there's this point about feedback loops, but also testing. How much do you test your new approaches to L&D? And do you get feedback loops? So if you were working in tech, you wouldn't just launch a new product. Apple don't launch, do they? They get the service users to kind of co-design. They kind of launch it. They get all the bugs worked out coming back. So it's difficult to do that in public services. I can't say, I'm going to change the bin round. Let's go for once every 4 weeks, see how it goes for a bit, see what the feedback loops would be, and then have another go. Because the feedback loops would be probably I'd lose my job. But on lots of things you can test, and I think on L&D you really can. But do people bother, or do you take silence to be acceptance and support, because they are definitely not the same thing. So that testing, learning and adapting, and then your own personal learning and development. Are you putting yourselves in other people's spaces? So I spend a lot of time in Oldham, for example, at the food bank. I spent half a day the other week. That gives you a very, very different view of public services and how they land, or our children's centres. Putting yourself in the space of the people that you are designing your programmes for, so that you understand their point of view before you do the design, as well as having their voices in, I just think is really important. And I'll leave it there if anybody's got any questions. Thank you.